Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from Pro Football Network. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, I suppose I should also say noted DeSean Jackson supporter.
Oh my God. That one was the what. So for people unaware, this is not true. Some account, Mark Thumb, which I'm convinced is like fake and is just trying to farm me for engagement, so I just blocked him. Just every so often, just like tweets random things at me and just like lies about me. And one of the lies was like, "Hey, so I see you support DeSean Jackson." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" So I was so surprised by this. I actually responded. This is back in 2020, right when the DeSean Jackson stuff was blowing up. He was like, "I see you support DeSean Jackson." I was like, "What are you talking about? What? Does it come out of nowhere?" No, I literally don't. I asked like 10 tweets ago. I said that the Eagles should cut him. Like, obviously, I don't. And he was like, "Well, you didn't say it was a top 25 story of the year," which I don't remember the context of that conversation or whatever. So I must have been voting on or talking about the top 25 stories or the top 25 sports stories or whatever. I don't know. And I was like, "Yeah, okay, maybe. I don't know. I don't know what the top 25 stories were, but sure, right." And he's like, "Would you say Drew Brees was a top 25 story?" And I said no, which I assume that's like either Drew Brees retiring or Advocare, which would be weird. Anyway, so the guy just assumed because I didn't include DeSean Jackson in some random story roundup list that I supported DeSean Jackson. So it's just so obnoxious. And the guy the guy was surprised that I got vaccinated. He thinks I'm like 2 steps away from being like a Trumper. It's like a very, like, he's so confident that he knows who I am. But it's just like very clear that he just like lies all the time. So eventually I blocked him, which I think is growth for me, right?
Well, I think so too, and I'm just upset that now I can't engage you on that account anymore.
All right, Mr. Thumb.
Would you expect anything different from a big mono? No, absolutely not. Jeez, you took away all of my fun. Plus, I happen to know that you support DeSean Jackson, so I can make audio say that you do.
Please don't.
Well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. We have a Colts game to preview. We'll be doing that here in just a moment. And we have a mailbag as well. But before we start, again, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you'd like to donate to the show and support us financially, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go over to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. You can get access to stuff like the bonus episodes, the Discord, a couple other things. Also, there will be a special extra Christmas episode for the Patreon people coming out a couple days after the regular one comes out, so check your inbox for that. But a special thank you over on Patreon to 2 people, over to Mark Ackerman and Wilhelm Grofty. Apologies, I am terrible with pronunciations. That has been a given for 9 years, and it's still going strong. But thank you so much to the 2 of you for signing up over on Patreon. You can also go over to paypal.me/NorseCode as well and donate there. That's a one-time donation. Or you can go over to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up your Norse Code shirts, your Norse Code baby onesies, your Arif shower curtains and throw pillows. All of these things can be picked up over at norsecode.threadless.com. Make sure to get your Christmas shopping done now, which is probably too late to get there, but you can probably get your Christmas socks for the new year at least. So
yeah, sure.
Yeah, norsecode.threadless.com. All right, let's get into the episode, and we have a preview of the Colts game that Arif conducted earlier today. He had an interview with Chris Shepard, who does film analysis for Stampede Blue, the Colts SB Nation site. So without further ado, let's get to the interview that Arif conducted earlier today.
All right. I'm here with Chris Shepard of StampedeBlue.com. He does a bunch of great film rooms over there, so I really wanted to get him on to talk about the Colts. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for asking. Hey, weird season, right, for the Colts?
Yeah, this is the weirdest season I can remember. Maybe the weirdest season on record for the Colts.
Yeah, which is saying something after the past couple. So it's pretty interesting. Obviously, I think the question that leads everything is just like, how do you feel about what led to the Jeff Saturday hiring, and then since then, how he's performed, what he's done, and whether or not your mind has changed from your kind of initial reaction.
Sure. Yeah. So my initial reaction, I was very upset initially. Just watching the Colts, it didn't matter who was coaching. It didn't matter who was calling the plays. They weren't going to be able to overcome the issues they were having with their offensive line. So when they fired Frank Reich, I was like, okay, well, Frank Reich took the fall for what was and what is a bad team. And so, I wasn't super happy about that. And I was expecting that they were going to name, defensive coordinator Gus Bradley or Bubba Ventrone, one of those guys, the interim.
Right.
And then, all of a sudden Jeff Saturday's music comes on, and the next thing I know, I'm like, what? The only thing that was more surprising was when Andrew Luck retired. That's the only announcement that was more surprising than Jeff Saturday being named head coach. But we've had a few weeks to go over it, and watch a few of the games that Saturday's coached. And I got to say, it still is as baffling now as it was then. He's terrible. He doesn't know what he's doing. So it's not been good. It has not been good.
It's funny that you mentioned Andrew Luck because of that amazing Seth Wickersham piece dropping, I think, about a week ago. So it was like great timing for that. But I think I was initially very, very skeptical. I was actually pretty upset on behalf of all these coaches that, had maybe a better claim to that particular opportunity.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, it reinforces like the who kind of network. But after that first game with the Eagles, I was like, there might be something here. 1-score game against the top team in the league. That's pretty cool. I don't know, man. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. So when you say he doesn't know what he's doing, what does that look like to you watching the Colts every week?
Well, so, it starts with his offensive coordinator, Parks Frazier. Mm-hmm. Parks Frazier has done nothing wrong. I realized I went to the Colts versus Raiders game. Actually, I didn't know Jeff Saturday was going to be the head coach when I bought those tickets.
That's how it goes, right?
Yeah. But, I went to the game. And like before the game started, I'm just kind of down close to the field. I'm just kind of watching people mill about, and I'm standing with a bunch of other Colts fans. And I realized that I was a huge nerd because I was the only one of, I don't know, maybe 100, 150 Colts fans that realized that guy standing there was our offensive coordinator. I was the only one. But so I've watched Parks Frazier, move his way up through the organization. 2 years ago, he was getting everybody coffee. And frankly, he knows more about getting coffee than he does calling plays at this point. It's not his fault.
Right.
He wasn't ready for this, but he's been thrust into this position. And he's doing the best he can, but his play calling it's been predictable. It has not been good. One of the things that Jim Irsay said during the press conference announcing Jeff Saturday was he talked about how he was glad Saturday didn't have experience because he wouldn't be afraid of analytics. He obviously
he wouldn't be so afraid that he would use analytics.
Yeah, well, apparently, yeah. That's I still don't fully understand the argument.
It doesn't make sense either way. Like, what does that have to do? Right. No correlation.
And so we've seen that. We've seen, Saturday's decisions as far as when to go for it, when to kick, when to go for two, when to, kick the extra point. His game management, his time management at the end of games has been poor. Really, all the things that your head coach needs to do on game day, Jeff Saturday has not been good at. From a leadership perspective, I don't doubt that Jeff Saturday is a good leader. You can't.
Oh, I'd run through a wall for him.
Right. You can't play in front of Peyton Manning for 13 years and not be on top of your stuff and not be a professional, not be good at what you do, and not know how to lead people. I have no doubt he's a good leader. He was not prepared. He was not qualified to be a head coach, and he's still not.
Is this something where it's just like, hey, man, no matter how much you mind your P's and Q's, no matter how much experience you have, no matter, how elite your mind is, or I should say playing experience, And no matter how naturally you are a leader, no matter how good you are at, a really critical leadership skill, prioritization, right? And organization, without the firsthand experience of working through an NFL organization, it is difficult or impossible to get a real handle, at least in the modern NFL, of all of the moving parts that make you an NFL head coach.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a job. So part of me wants to compare it to other jobs, but it's not really super comparable. It's not, it is, but it isn't. But if you work in sales and you go through and you're a great salesman and all of a sudden you get promoted to sales manager, if you have no management experience, that doesn't mean, you're not, you might be a good manager, but that doesn't mean that you're just going to be a good sales manager. So it is different. There are certain aspects, sure, that overlap, but there are just different things. It's a different skill set. And guys who started like Parks Frazier, getting coffee for guys and working their way up. And, there's certainly problems with the way the system works now. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that there's not, but that system where a guy starts low on the totem pole and he works his way up progressively will get more and more responsibility to the point where you look at a guy, you interview him and you go, yeah, I think this guy can run a team. I don't know that there's even the best quarterback in the league right now, whoever that is, when he's done playing, I don't think you just throw him in to be a head coach and say, hey man, here you go, run this team.
No, Houston Texans disagree. They almost did it Jeff Saturday and hired Josh McCown at the gate.
Yeah, the Texans are a unique organization.
It's the nicest way to say that about a division rival. I respect it.
Yeah. Well, eventually
rival
they might be
strong.
good. And the Colts, with the way we're going, I don't want to say too much bad stuff right now. Fair. I just don't.
Yeah. I don't want to play with that fire. I understand. Yeah, I mean, you take a look at some players who are coaches like Mike Vrabel, and they got to their spot really quick. But I mean, Vrabel worked his way up for sure.
Right.
So
and a lot of Colts fans have talked about Vrabel and pointed to him. And they said, "Well, he went really fast." I said, "Yeah, he went really fast because it's obvious, number one, that he's smart. He's good at what he does. He's a really good coach, and so he got in that position." He worked his way up. Even though it went fast, he still earned what he has. He didn't jump the line. Maybe he did a little because he was a player, but I don't know that jumping the line just a little bit, not starting getting people coffee because you played 15 years in the league. Maybe you start as a position coach because you have that experience. So it's just different. It's different when I mean, there's tons
of players that are in coaching positions right now. Good coaches, right? Like, Wes Welker, wide receivers coach for the Miami Dolphins, or Greg Lewis, wide receivers coach, I believe, for the 49ers, I want to say. But there's a bunch of and they don't move up as quickly as Mike Vrabel did, or as DeMeco Ryan seems to be doing. So there's clearly some other element here. Kind of a play. Mike Kafka, right? An offensive coordinator. So, I mean, these are all kind of elements that are at play. Normally we spend a lot more time talking about the roster, but this is such a unique story, right? That I kind of wanted to get into it. I mean, it was something I really strongly opposed. Felt kind of dumb after watching the Eagles game. Felt a little dumber after watching the Raiders game, and now I feel confident in being angry again. So
the confusing part about this Colts team is that for the first, 11 weeks of the season, it was the best Indianapolis Colts defense I've ever seen.
Right? How did that even happen? Like, what did he do differently that made that happen?
Well, that's the thing. It really wasn't. It was, the defense was good under Frank Reich too. But the offense has been terrible, and that's what Frank Reich was good at. So I get the wanting to move on from Frank Reich. The way that it happened and the timing that it happened was wrong. They fired him over the phone. He called him and fired. Yeah, whatever.
It's tough to complain about how classless Josh McDaniels was to the Colts when you turn around to do that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's been rough, but the defense was really good. The past couple of games, we've seen the defense start to fall apart. And, when the defense was as good as it was and the offense was as bad as it was, eventually I think it's just human nature. Those guys on the defense are going to start looking around and going, "Hey guys, I'm going to play next year. Let's, like, I think it's done. I think we're over this year."
Yeah, I'm going to play hard, but we're not putting, bodies on the line here.
Right. Like, my thumb hurts a little. I'm sitting out. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right.
What are we playing for? All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the actual players that will be playing in the game and on the roster. So, the Colts come in with, I think, a fairly underrated receiving core, a baffling offensive line. And probably a more potential than talent tight end group, but I do like them. Obviously, the quarterback position, we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. That one's kind of interesting. And a running back room that is obviously highlighted by, last year's MVP candidate, Offensive Player of the Year. I think he won that outright with Jonathan Taylor and like some pretty good backs behind him. Not as productive. I think that a lot of that has to do with the offensive line. I am most interested in this receiver group. So I want to talk about how good Michael Pittman is. I just submitted my receiver rankings to Pro Football Network. Pittman just cracked, I think he's like 30 out of the top 32. I know some places have him at 25. And I know people that don't know very much about Michael Pittman would be surprised that he's even in the top 32. Can you tell me about him and then tell me about Alec Pierce, who seems severely underutilized?
Sure, yeah. So Michael Pittman Jr., he is a really good football player. And it kind of drives me nuts when people say, this guy's a good football player. But he is. He's not just a guy that just runs routes and catches balls. He does that, and he does that very well. But it's me, so I'm going to talk about how good of a blocker he is. Michael Pittman Jr. is a really good blocker. And I know that's not exciting. Sorry, I started with the least.
Oh no. We start every conversation about Adam Thielen here with blocking. We get it.
Sure, yeah. Michael Pittman Jr. not only is he a good blocker, but he gives a lot of effort there. That's one thing that he's always talked about. He's talked about how his dad, who was a running back,
right,
was friends with wide receivers and respected wide receivers who gave good effort blocking, and that's one of the things that Pittman Jr. has always talked about doing, and that's something that he does give great effort for the team by blocking. Now, as far as a receiver goes, he's not a guy that's going to burn you deep, but he can move the chains. If he's covered, he's open. He's a guy that he will fight through traffic. He will go up. He will make tough catches. He will go over the middle. He'll take a hit. He'll get right back up. He's consistent. He is a very, very solid wide receiver. He's a good route runner, not a great route runner, but he's good. There's some separation there, but more than anything, he's a big guy that you can feel comfortable just throwing the ball up to, and he'll go get it.
Awesome. Well, so we didn't mention Paris Campbell. He's kind of one that flies under the radar in these discussions. Has he been he was a second round pick 2019. Has he been a disappointment? Is he playing better now? Is it hard to tell because of the passing situation? What's the story surrounding him?
So Paris Campbell, his first 3 years in the league, he was one of the least lucky players I've ever seen with injury. The guy would come out, he would play in a game, he'd get the ball in his hands 3 or 4 times. He'd be very exciting. And then, the fourth time he got the ball, he'd break his ankle or, dislocate his elbow, or, just crazy. He didn't really dislocate his elbow, but just crazy stuff seemed to happen to him. And it was nothing. It wasn't like a conditioning issue. It wasn't like that he was just brittle. It was just, he got incredibly unlucky. And this year he's managed to stay healthy. And with a better passing situation, he's that third receiver who's really exciting, who could really open up games, make big plays. He's managed, he has been, he has managed to stay healthy, and it's been great to see him, in some ways it's great to see what he is, and what he could have been, but it is sad because, he lost those first 3 years. Now he's going to be a free agent, and I don't know if he's going to come back. There's a lot up in the air with the Colts. I don't know if he's coming back or not, but if he would have been healthy for the past 3 years. He doesn't want to
go to the bastion of stability that is the Jim Irsay Colts.
Right. Yeah, exactly. He might, if I were him, I'd probably want to leave. But if he would have been performing like this for the past 3 years, he probably would have been a pretty highly sought after free agent in this, this upcoming cycle. But he's still an exciting player. He's still young. But yeah, he's good. He's not somebody that you're going to have to necessarily, nobody's going to lose sleep over Paris Campbell, but he is a good player. He's very fast. The rest of the offense just means that you're probably not worried about Paris Campbell. Alec Pierce, is another guy you mentioned.
Yeah.
He's a rookie. So
Cincinnati, right?
Yeah, Cincinnati, a second round pick. And Alec Pierce is really good when he just throw up the ball and let him go get it. I wish that Matt Ryan would have just been throwing it up to let Alec Pierce. He's so good in contested situations. I don't know that the Colts have ever had a rookie I don't know that the Colts have had a receiver. We traditionally have the smaller guys. Alec Pierce is just so good climbing the ladder and going and getting it. Where he's not great right now is in his route running. He's rounding a lot of things off, taking a lot of steps, getting in and out of his breaks. So that's something, he's a young guy that's going to have to get cleaned up. But right now, if they just run him on vertical routes and throw the ball up high, he'll go get it. He is a really exciting player, and I'm excited for him for the future. He should have been used more this season, certainly, but it is what it is. It's been a rough year.
Yeah, on to 2023, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So this offensive line, like I mentioned, baffling to me. I know they've gone through a lot of iterations. There's been different 5-person setups across the offensive line, but and that explains a lot. As Braden Smith played on both sides of the line, as Bernard Raymond played like 3 positions. I'm trying to wrap my head around. I know Matt Pryor played a little bit. Did Dennis Kelly play? Give me the 411 here.
Sure. Okay. So to start the season, Matt Pryor, we'll go back to last year. Matt Pryor had a really good half of football at left tackle last year. And this year, Chris
by
Ballard
half, you mean like 2 quarters, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Half of one game.
Okay.
And Chris Ballard saw that and was like, yeah, that's the guy. He's my starter. So to start the season, Matt Pryor started at left tackle. The only real backup plan there was a third-round rookie out of, I believe, Central Michigan, Bernhard Raimann. Raimann he's always been a project. He's a really athletic guy. He's only played offensive line for 2 years, but he was the backup left tackle. Matt Pryor was the starter. At right guard, who started at right guard to start the year? It was Danny Pinter. Pinter, normally plays center, former 5th rounder out of Ball State.
I'm trying to remember. He was like a super athlete, right?
Yeah, very good athlete. The book on him coming out was a very good athlete. He was a smart guy, was not very strong. And we were all hoping that in the past 3 years, he'd corrected that issue, and he hasn't, but we know that now. We didn't know that then. But he started at right guard. Right tackle was Braden Smith. Center, Ryan Kelly and Quentin Nelson. They've been there for a long time. As the season got rolling, we realized Matt Pryor was terrible at left tackle. And finally we got some movement there, and the coaching staff went, hey, you know what? He was terrible at left tackle. Let's try him at right tackle, but we're going to take our really good right tackle, Braden Smith, and we're going to move him to guard because that makes sense. Yeah, why not? Matt Pryor was a disaster at right tackle. So we moved Braden Smith back to right tackle. Danny Pinter was also a disaster at right guard. He was awful. But we went, hey, you know what? Matt Pryor's been bad at 2 spots. I bet he can be a good right guard. We put him at right guard, and come to find out, he is just bad at professional football. He's better at professional football than me, but he is bad at professional football. So anyway, he finally got benched for the 3rd and final time. And Bernhard Raimann has filled in at left tackle. Dennis Kelly did play some left tackle. He wasn't bad. He was probably about the same as Raimann. And, if you're about the same as the 3rd round rookie, the 3rd round rookie is probably going to play before you do.
Yeah.
Quentin Nelson has been at left guard the whole time. Ryan Kelly, he's dealt with some injuries. The problem with Ryan Kelly is that I think he's 30, but he looks like he's about 38. He hasn't played well. It's been a really rough year for him.
So I was going to ask about that because this is probably Quentin Nelson's worst year at guard. Yes. This is not a recognizable Ryan Kelly to me. I was going to ask about them next because you can explain, left tackle, right guard, right tackle. They're not all playing well because of all of the different stuff, but like Quentin Nelson, Q and Ryan Kelly, like what is the deal?
Yeah. So the only thing that I can come to with Quentin Nelson, last year he had a back injury, and big guys on the offensive line, back injuries usually don't go too well together. He has played better as the season's gone on, but he's still not the dominant guy that he was. And, that might be something that comes back with time. But yeah, this has been his worst season by far. The worst season for Quentin Nelson is still really good left guard, right? He's been good, but he hasn't been great. And the first 3 seasons of his career, he was truly 3-4. He was truly great. And he hasn't been that guy. His play's fallen off. Ryan Kelly has always been a good, not great player. He's been solid up front. He's the type of guy you plug and play for a long time. But injuries, I think, have caught up with Ryan Kelly. He's been hurt a lot the past 3-4 years. And he's not playing well. He looks slow. He plays center, so he's not sprinting, but his feet look slow. He's not, he's not picking up blocks that he used to pick up. So those guys those two look like they've diminished with, both age and injury, and not so much age with Nelson. But yeah, the most consistent offensive lineman we've had is Braden Smith. He's been solid, not great, but solid. And then the other 4 spots on the offensive line have been pretty hit or miss. And, part of me does want to blame Chris Ballard for, bringing in Matt Pryor and having him start at left tackle, and, having Danny Pinter, a guy who clearly wasn't ready to play right guard, playing right guard. But, the other part of me goes, well, we still have an all-world guard in Quentin Nelson. We have a really good center in Ryan Kelly, and Braden Smith's a really good right tackle. We can have a back chip somebody, so right. With that lineup, theoretically, we should have been fine. And instead, you see, really 4 out of the 5 guys fall off a lot. Nobody could have really foreseen that happening. And if Chris Ballard would have foreseen that, he would have been a wizard.
All right. Well, that tells us, I think, a lot about the offensive line. How do you feel about the 5-person setup right now?
I will give Jeff Saturday credit. They're playing as well as they've played all year. Which, if you hire a head coach whose claim to fame
is he giving them personal coach? Because out the gate against the Eagles, it felt like, hey, this is the best I've seen this offensive line.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. He's been asked, where are you going to focus? He's like, well, the offensive line. That's the only place he's qualified to say anything. So yeah, it makes sense. But he's worked specifically with Ryman, with the rookie on the outside, and it does look like they've cleaned up protections. They're playing better. They're still Will Fries at right guard. He's still Will Fries, so he's not great. But they are playing better. At least they have so far. I say that, and we might make some guy look like John Randall this weekend. I don't know, but they've been a lot better. Yeah, it is unlikely, but you never know, man. It's been a weird year.
That's fair. I'm just thinking about who the Vikings have along the defensive line, and who would be a man on a good day. This guy could look like John Randall, and I'm blanking. Let's talk a little bit about these tight ends before we talk about kind of the heavy hitters at running back and quarterback.
Sure.
So I mentioned that they're more potential than talent right now. I don't know if that was fair or not. That's just kind of my initial feeling. But it feels like all 3 of these guys, Jelani Woods, Mo Alley-Cox, Kyler Granson, are all getting playing time. Jelani Woods, confirmed huge human. Mo Alley-Cox, confirmed big human. And Kylan Granson, a tight end. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. I think it's fair to say that right now they're more potential than, actual what they are on the field. Mo Alley-Cox at this point, he's a big guy. And that's really, and I hate this, but it's true. He was a basketball player that converted to tight end in the NFL. He didn't play college football at all. But Mo is not a great athlete. He does not move exceptionally well. He is fine.
No Jimmy Graham, you'd say.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, definitely not. But he has sure hands. He has huge hands. They swallow a ball. But he's not exciting. Mo's fine for what he is. I'm way more excited about Jelani Woods and Kylen Granson. Kylen Granson's a small guy. He's too big to be, or he's not, well, he's maybe not too big. He's too slow to play wide receiver. And he's not big enough to be a true tight end. He's a guy they're going to move around the offense. They're going to use him in different ways, but he's got sure hands. He's quick. He can beat you underneath, and he is an exciting player. A couple times a game, he's going to make a catch or he's going to make a play that is exciting. It's good to see him coming along. And Jelani Woods is a massive human being. Like you said,
he big, dude.
Dude looks like a moose. He's massive. And the thing is, not only is he massive, but his relative athletic score was the highest of any tight end ever tested. So the guy's a great athlete. He's huge. And with some stability along the offensive line, and at quarterback, we, maybe would have seen more out of Woods so far this year, but he's kind of broken out and had a couple of nice performances, but he hasn't consistently produced. And I think that, like I said, is just more about what's around him.
Yeah, I'm honestly surprised I was able to see him at the East-West Shrine game where he also stood out for his size. And he struck me as a guy that would certainly be somebody kind of worth investing in. I don't know if I would have picked him in the third round, but worth investing in as a developmental guy that wouldn't do much year one. And he's already exceeded my expectations. Looks like he's already worth a third round pick. Looks like he's already developed a little bit more than I expected. So it's kind of exciting to see how he'll go. Yeah. So quarterback, running back, we briefly saw Sam Ehlinger, of Texas's back fame, and Matt Ryan of, 28-3 fame. I don't know. Everyone knows who Matt Ryan is. Why did they bench him and why did they unbench him?
So Frank Reich benched Matt Ryan. So Matt Ryan had a shoulder injury.
That's right.
He was set to miss a couple of games. And there was, I want to say it was at the weekly presser. Frank Reich made the announcement that he was benching Matt Ryan for the rest of the year. And Sam Ehlinger was going to be the starter. And that came out during the presser. And then later on, the Colts beat guys start reporting. It was thinly veiled, but it was clear that it wasn't Frank Reich's decision. Jim Irsay wanted Matt Ryan benched. He wanted to start Sam Ehlinger. And so, we started Sam Ehlinger, and predictably the Colts looked bad. Sam's a young guy. He provides a lot in the way of athleticism that Matt Ryan doesn't have. But if you're looking for a guy to run an offense, even still at this point, Matt Ryan hasn't been great, but he's better than Sam Ehlinger. And what happened was, after 2 games, they fired Frank Reich, and then Jim Irsay let his buddy pick the quarterback of his choice. And he did what anybody with eyes would do, and he decided to start Matt Ryan. That's
correct me if I'm wrong. Saturday at the presser said that Ehlinger was the starter, right? Am I hallucinating? I feel like he said that.
At this point, it's all kind of run together. But it wouldn't surprise me if he did say that. That seems like something that would have happened. I know
that tracks. Yes,
right. Yeah, I do remember and I don't know why I remember this more than the quarterback, but I do remember that he said that Bernhard Raimann was going to start at left tackle, and that was one of those things. And it did strike me as odd because he wasn't even watching the Colts when he got the phone call to be the head coach. So how did he know who he was going to start at left tackle? He was sitting on his couch.
That was my question because I was on a podcast while people were, tweeting out and reports of this presser. And I think that's where I got the information about the quarterback. And I was like, why is he making a decision now? He literally has not been, I guess technically he's been in the building as a consultant, but you know what I mean, right? He's not in it, right? He's not in the mix. It's just wild to me. So Matt Ryan starting, has the quickest time to throw in a clean pocket, or not quickest time to throw, lowest depth of target in a clean pocket, which I think speaks to how quickly he gets rid of the ball. And the Colts also have had the worst pass block win rate. To me, these are related things.
Yeah.
Because the pocket is clean because Matt Ryan is getting rid of the ball before like PFF or whoever can log it officially as a pressure.
Right.
So is Matt Ryan secretly like only below average and the offensive line's making him look bad, or is he like also bad?
So that's tough. So some games he's been fine. Some games, you know, you watch him and he's, you know, making the right reads. He's taking what's there. And then other games he looks terrified. And he's at this point he's playing scared, and I don't blame him. He's 38.
Right. I'm not here to get hit. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah. So at this point, he is playing scared. It looks like he's playing scared. He's trying to get the ball out quick. If he can't get the ball out quick, more often than not, he's escaping. Even when the pocket's clean, he's escaping. And it's just not good. Matt's not playing well. The offensive line is bad. You know, it's a chicken or the egg kind of debate right now. So here's the thing. Matt Ryan was never supposed to have to win anybody a game. When he came to Indianapolis, he was sold on a good offensive line with a great running back, and he was just going to have to manage the game. He was going to have to take what was there, take what the defense gave him, and hand the ball off a lot. And I still believe that if that were his role, the Indianapolis Colts and Matt Ryan would look a lot better than what they do right now. And that just, you know, that hasn't happened. So I think that in the right role, Matt Ryan would have been fine this year. In a role where he has to be a guy that you rely on to go out and win games, he can't do it. He can't. He's beyond that.
So, I mean, he'd be handing off the ball to Jonathan Taylor, who is not having the season he had last year. My take, and then your response to that is, it is not impossible. It is really unlikely for extremely good players to replicate MVP quality seasons. Although, you know, running back, no MVP, but MVP quality seasons, just because that's just the nature of variance, that he'll have some sort of injury or the ball won't break his way or something like that. Even small minor injuries will add up. And so it's impossible to replicate that level of quality. So there is some element that is Jonathan Taylor is not playing as well as he did last year because that's a tough ask. But also, like the offensive line, we've been talking about it. They seem like a better run blocking unit than a pass protection unit. It seems like that's what they've been built for. That seems like what they do, but they're not like good at it. Plus, I mean, if Matt Ryan is throwing short and the biggest threat is running the ball, it feels like you just crowd the box anyway. How much of the decreased production for Jonathan Taylor is Jonathan Taylor? How much of that is the offensive line? How much of that is the play calling? How much of that is kind of the general environment? What do you, or is Jonathan Taylor producing exactly like how you expect? Like, what do you ascribe to all of this?
Sure. So I think the biggest thing was that, well, when you look at his stats for the entire season, the biggest thing was that he was dealing with injuries early on in the season. He was dealing with an ankle injury. The ankle injury sidelined him. He came back. I think he came back too early. He played on it, didn't play well. I think he missed another game, and then he's played the rest of the year. So the ankle injury certainly hurt. Early on, the offensive line was really, really bad. It was awful. So you've got, you know, a guy who's running behind an awful offensive line. Like you said, it is tough to repeat, you know, from the highs that he saw last year, but I still think he's that guy. I do. He's still young. He's made a lot of really amazing runs. Like he'll make a cut, he'll make a guy miss. You know, he jukes a guy, he looks fast, and then you look up and you realize that he did all that 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and he's run for 2.5 yards, and that was a great 2.5 yard run. So there's some of that too with his game this year. Some of it, like you said, it has been play calling, especially recently with Parks Frazier. I want to say, was it the Cowboys game? They're all running together. They're so bad. But he ran on, I want to say 85% of possible first downs he ran the ball.
Oh, good Lord.
And it wasn't just that he was running that often. It was that he was running that often and they were averaging 0.75 yards per carry when they did that.
Excuse me?
Yeah, I'm not joking. Like, I wish I were kidding. So Jonathan Taylor has been fighting play calling. He's been fighting an offensive line, and he's been fighting injuries. If he were producing at a better level, he would deserve the MVP, even if he, even on this team, because that would be incredible. I don't think that it's as much Jonathan Taylor as it is everything around him. With that said, sure, maybe he's not trusting the guys in front of him, and maybe he's missed some holes. But I also can't blame him for not trusting the guys in front of him either.
Let's flip sides. So with Shaquille Leonard gone, with Matt Eberflus gone, cornerbacks are what they are, I guess. This is not the same Colts defense that we're used to seeing. And some of that, it just feels like, hey, there's no pass rush. Some of that feels like, hey, the coordination is not kind of up to snuff as what it needs to be. Some of it's, man, you could really use Shaquille Leonard. I'm like just really curious overall, kind of what your take is. Like you've been watching this every week. You've been breaking down the film on kind of what's been happening. Should we have expected more from? Okay, so the announcers pronounce it Bobby Okereke. Is that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Should we have expected more from Bobby Okereke? Or Yannick Ngakoue sacks fake? His PFF's grade is like really bad, but his production's really good. Is Kwity Paye who I thought he was, which was a pretty good bendy guy, or is he actually struggling? What's up with DeForest Buckner? Why is Danico Autry gone? I feel like you should have kept him. What's going on with Grover Stewart? Like, tell me about, and we'll go through all of the positions a little bit more, but just tell me just the shape of the defense overall.
So actually this, and like I said, until recently, this defense has been really, really good. When the Colts hired Gus Bradley, I was terrified. I'm not a Gus Bradley fan. I haven't been. I don't, I don't love single high coverage, but Gus Bradley does. So, I wasn't excited about it. I didn't know how, I didn't know how it was going to go. And really for the first half of the season, they surprised me. They were the reason the Colts were in the game. The Colts had the worst offense I've seen an Indianapolis team have since before Jim Harbaugh was the quarterback.
I was about to ask, what about Harbaugh? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Since Harbaugh. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, they were the reason that the Colts were in games. They're the reason.
Sorry, wait, hold on. Worse than the broken neck season? I just need to get this out here.
11. Oh. Yeah. Oh man, that's tough.
Trying to remember the quarterback. That was a painter, right?
Curtis Painter.
Curtis Painter. Yeah. That's right.
Curtis Painter and Kerry Collins was there for a couple
Kerry
games.
Collins, Pro Bowl quarterback. Kerry Collins, by the way.
Yeah, the guy who almost lost the Colts, Andrew Luck. It was Dan Orlovsky. Dan Orlovsky. He was the guy. He got the Colts to 2 wins that year. The Colts' only 2 wins were Dan Orlovsky. Yeah,
what a monster.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, maybe 2011 was worse. Okay, all right.
The two offenses that brought you the number 1 pick in historic quarterback drafts. Got it.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So, man, if we could have done that again, that would have been cool. But yeah, so anyway, the defense has been good. I hate to say that we haven't missed Shaquille Leonard. He's a really good player. He's a great player. But Zaire Franklin has played better than anybody. I was terrified of what Zaire Franklin was going to do. And he's not a guy you want deep down the field in coverage, but he's been good at the middle linebacker spot. He's been a solid player. It's actually really cool to see Franklin do what he's done. He was a special teams guy. He was always a guy that was good in the locker room. And he was a guy that, you were happy that was there and around. It seemed like everybody loved the guy. And now he's come out, he's playing really well. And that's been cool to see. He struggles in coverage, but he's a good player, good dude. I'm happy they just had the season he's had. Okereke can run. I don't know how he's graded out on PFF. I'm not sure. But in coverage, Okereke is good. Every now and then he gets lost, it seems like, defending the run. But he's not. He's a good player. He's a very good linebacker. I hope they re-sign him, but with as much money as they have tied up in Leonard, I don't know that they'll be able to. EJ Speed's another guy who's played well. He is from the famous Tarleton State University. So
football powerhouse.
Yeah. Any Tarleton fans out there? EJ Speed's their guy. And then he's played well. Not great, but he's played well. On the defensive line. You talked about Ngakoue. Like you said, he probably has graded out poorly. During the first half of the season, Colts fans were pretty upset that we had traded away Rock Ya-Sin to get Ngakoue in here. Rock is fine. He is what he is, but he was a decent corner. Ngakoue is really rough against the run. He's not going to set you an edge. He's not going to make you a lot of tackles on the edge.
Yeah, sounds familiar.
Yeah, right. He is a guy who is going to rush the passer. He does have a few unblocked sacks this year. But at the same time, he has been a consistent pass rusher. And the Colts, that's something the Colts really haven't had since Freeney and Mathis were here. So he's been fine. I hope they don't give him a huge contract, but he's fine. Kwity Paye on the other side. Paye's another guy that's dealt with some injuries. I want to say he had a high ankle sprain. He was out for a while. Before that, he looked explosive. He looked like he was going to have a breakout year. Had a couple sacks in a game. And then, he struggled to come back from that. Another guy that missed another couple games after missing an initial few games. But I think he's going to play this week. And hopefully he can pick that back up. But he is a bendy guy, but he's also really good from his time at Michigan at setting the edge. They asked him to really, set the edge, to eat blocks, and he excels at that. But I think that he is a guy that with time can get around the edge. He's quick, man. He gets off the ball fast. But yeah, Quity's a guy who I think will continue to come along. He started to, got hurt, but I think he'll be fine.
Okay.
Buckner's a guy. He's still Defoe. He's still tough to block. He's a huge athlete. He can get high and get himself blocked and doubled and taken out. But he's still a handful for guys to block up. But Grover Stewart, Grover's been he's been unblockable for most of the season one-on-one. He's really a two-down guy. You're not going to see him rush the passer a lot. They're going to bring in either Brian Cowart or Eric Johnson to rush, or Deo Odengbo. They'll bring him in too to rush on third downs. But Grover on first and second downs, don't run it at Grover. He is good. It's tough to overstate how good he is. But he's I love Grover Stewart. He makes wings in his sink. So how do you hate the guy?
All right, yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
All right.
And season Hard Knocks was a tragedy. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we did a pretty good job covering that defensive line and linebacker groups. That front seven is pretty much taken care of. But you mentioned they traded away Rock Ya-Sin. They I don't know if Kenny Moore's going to play. It sounds like he's going to. I don't know. Oh, he's out?
I think he's out, yeah.
That's too bad. But this cornerback group does not seem familiar to me. I mean, there's a familiar name, it's Stephon Gilmore, but I don't know kind of what to do looking at this cornerback group. I recognize these safeties, rookie Nick Cross. I think there's another rookie in there, Rodney Thomas. You've got the more famous Rodney McLeod, which I believe was on the Rams and the Eagles. Julian Blackmon, is he playing safety still?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
He'll be in there.
He's listed here as a nickel corner. That didn't seem right.
So he will. That's the crazy thing. He is going to play nickel with Kenny Moore being out. Yeah.
Okay. Wild. Okay, great. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Rodney McLeod, no way is he the same guy that he was to Philadelphia. Stephon Gilmore, is he who we recognize him to be? What's going on with this group?
So first, we'll talk about Rodney McLeod. Rodney McLeod has been really, really good in this defense. I didn't watch him when he was with Philly. I don't know. But he's been the best free agent pickup the Colts have had this year. McLeod has been solid. He's been all over the place. He's just consistent. Stephon Gilmore, I don't want him deep. I don't want him in deep coverage. He's not the same guy that he used to be. Now, in short coverage, underneath stuff, late in games when the game's more physical and less likely to get a flag, Stephon Gilmore's still a dude in short coverage. At the other cornerback spot, Brandon Faison has drawn a lot of hatred from fans all year long, and part of it is because he hasn't been great, and part of it is that he was playing over Isaiah Rodgers. And Faison, he's out with an illness. He has been out all year. He's doubtful for the game, so I don't know if he's going to play. But Colts fans are going to be happy that Isaiah Rodgers is getting more burn. Faison's a guy that came over with Gus Bradley from the Raiders. And he's been in the system, and he's playing because he's more familiar with it. That's all it is. Rodgers is far and away more physically gifted. He's a better athlete, but he probably doesn't know the checks. He doesn't know adjustments nearly as well as Faison does. But Rodgers is going to get the nod here. He has been, but they split a lot of reps. And Rodgers is good, not great, but he's a good corner. At that nickelback spot you talked about, Kenny Moore, and Kenny Moore he's a lot better when he can face the football, when he can see the quarterback, when he's playing in that zone, and he doesn't have to turn his back and run in man coverage. You take away a little bit of what makes him special when you make him play man, and he's had to do that more this year, but he still made plays. If you ask the guy to blitz, he's really good blitzing coming off the edge. But like you said, Julian Blackmon, he is going to play that nickelback spot. And I don't know. I like it. I like that they're going to try it. I don't know how that's going to go. But the safeties they've played really well. Rodney Thomas, 7th rounder out of Yale. Nobody saw that guy coming, but he's played really well. Been really happy with him. It's been a big surprise, but the secondary has been a strong point for the Colts this year. Don't know if they're going to hold up with the injuries starting to pile up here, but we'll see what happens.
Fair enough. So all of that in mind, I mean, it sounds like this defense is playing a little bit better than I'd initially characterized it, and has, some horses to go with it, can play pretty well, but I'm still kind of just wondering, you see a player like Justin Jefferson, you see a player like Dalvin Cook, who's not having a great season, somewhat similar to Jonathan Taylor, but you see kind of the weapons that the Vikings have available to them. They just had probably the best performance I've seen from Kirk Cousins last week. Do you have confidence that you've got the ability to maybe not stop, I don't know, but maybe not stop Justin Jefferson, but like slow him down enough that, this offense isn't going to be what kills you? Or kind of how do you take a look at that Vikings offense, understand how the Colts defense has been playing, and kind of tease out what might happen?
Sure. So if this were week 8, I would say, definitely the Colts, you might be able to move the ball, but good luck scoring. That was true early on in the year. It hasn't been true the past couple of games. Even, against the Eagles, they went out, they played them tough. And they were in the game because of the defense until they won at the end. But, the past couple of games, it looks like, they're doing what bad teams do, and they're starting to fall apart. They're not playing disciplined football. They're not, doing the same things they did that made them good at the beginning of the season. So if I were a Vikings fan, I would feel pretty good about what the Vikings offense can do, because they can put up points. They, like you just listed all the great players they have. So if this were a few weeks ago, I would take the Colts defense to face up with them and play well. I don't know that's going to happen this week. I think that the locker room is kind of starting to go, and I think they're starting to fall apart. And part of me, I'm not happy about that, but I want the draft pick. I'm not going to lie. I want the pick.
Yeah, it's a silver lining. Let's say that.
Yeah, right. So, I don't think they've got it in them to play with the Vikings this week. But I think that, If this game were a few weeks ago, it'd be a different story.
And so the Colts are, unless there's something about special teams that you really want to talk about. I know that it got kind of weird with the releasing the kicker, and I know the punter's hurt, but unless there's something notable, we can focus here and move on.
Not really. Yeah, nothing to write home about.
Fair enough. So the Colts are 4.5 or 4-point underdogs. Based off of our conversation, I feel fairly confident taking Vikings -4, but that's decontextualized. Now you can recontextualize it. What do you think the game's kind of outcome is going to be based off of all this?
Yeah, so just based on where the Colts are, it is kind of tough to know where they're at coming off the bye, especially this late in the season with everything that's happened. But I won't personally bet against the Colts. I don't want to feel good about making money when the Colts lose. But if I were a Vikings fan and I were betting on the game, I would take the points and feel good about it. I don't think the Colts are going to win, and I don't think that they're within a touchdown. So, that's how I feel.
What does the score look like to you, do you think, at the end?
So let me look here. The Colts have scored more than 20 points 2 times this year. They scored 25 against the Raiders, and they put up 34 against the Jags. So,
Jags games don't count in either direction for the Colts.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, 25 there, 34 there. Every other game has been 20 or under. So the Colts aren't going to score 20 points. They will not score 20 points.
That's why. Did you see how bad the Vikings defense was last week?
I don't care. They're not going to score 20 points. They can't. They're allergic.
All right.
So
that was good.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah. So they're not going to score 20. I don't know what the Vikings are going to put up. It's tough with this Colts team because for half the year I was confident in how good the defense was. The defense was only giving up points when the offense put them in terrible positions or late in games when they've been on the field for most of the game. I would say that I would probably put them at 28, somewhere in 28 to 33, somewhere in there for what the Vikings are going to score. I would go. So if I gun to my head, I'd go 16 to 28.
All right. Unusual score. Love that.
Yeah. Well,
anything else you want to get off your chest? I mean, it feels like we've had a productive discussion. It feels like we've grown, the two of us.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's been a rough year. Vikings fans enjoy it.
Yeah, fair enough. We've been talking a lot about how the Vikings are frauds and they're fake and they're not really a 10-win team. Whatever, they win, right? That's fun.
Who cares?
Winning is good. Yeah.
Be the biggest frauds in the world. You've won 10 games. Enjoy it. God, what I wouldn't give to be covering a 10-win fraud. Man, what's that like? Is it nice?
Well, okay. Well, so here's the thing: the Vikings have I don't know if you call it a genetic history, but they've traumatized their fans enough that any sign that the rug is going to be pulled out from under them is cause for alarm. So when the Packers were frauds at 13-3, Packers fans were like, yeah, okay, whatever. We're just going to win in the playoffs. I mean, they didn't, but that doesn't matter. So you've got a 13-3 team, you're fine, right? They did not have the sort of Damocles hanging over them. The Vikings have only ever disappointed, right? And so the concern is that the fraud discussion is just meant to build up that emotional wall so that when they disappoint in the playoffs, you can say, I saw it coming. It doesn't hurt me. I'm not coping right now. I've only downed one whiskey. So, that's kind of like the nature of it, right? Like the Colts have not been as lucky in the playoffs as they should have been over the past 20 years, but they have won.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's fair.
It is a little bit different, the nature of these kinds of discussions. So, feeling that fraud out is more an emotional exercise in protecting oneself, but it is still important to enjoy the wins as they come and then be pleasantly surprised when they continue to come.
Yeah. That's okay. That's fair. All right, you got me.
Yeah, all right. Where can people find you?
You can find me always on StampedeBlue.com. You can find my work there. You can also find me on Twitter at NFL Scheme. I'll go ahead and promote myself a little bit. I'm a pretty good game day follow. Don't tell the NFL, but I might tweet out some highlights as they happen. And to be fair, they are a little heavy-handed on the Colts side. But, if the Vikings do something that is hilariously good for the Vikings and hilariously bad for the Colts, I'll just tweet out the highlight with LOL usually.
Yeah, that's content. Yeah, for sure.
Right. Yeah. So I'll put that out there. And but yeah, you can find me there, NFL Scheme. I am on Twitter a lot. So yeah, check me out.
Much to your detriment and to our benefit.
Yes.
That's nice.
Oh, yeah. It's terrible there.
It's a silly place. Never go.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, let's get into the email bag. And the first question is from Connor, who asks, what are your thoughts that it seems like Dalvin's decline, that the Vikings should shift more of the workload like Dallas has with Zeke and Pollard? From what I've seen, Madison has shown more consistent power and energy in his runs.
I don't have the same view of how Madison is playing. I will say it is kind of an interesting shift from when we were beginning like training camp, and a lot of people were talking about, cutting Alexander Madison to keep all the running backs to only have 3 running backs, right? To keep all the running backs on the roster, Ty Chandler, Kene Wangu, and Dalvin Cook, with Madison, being traded away or more likely being cut, to talking about Madison as if he should be getting, more carries, which is not, I'm not saying that's like a consistent take on Vikings Twitter, but rather that people are pretty happy with how Madison is playing, which I don't know, that's just interesting to me, I guess. The thing about this is that Dalvin Cook is still an explosive player. I think that he's playing with a little bit more juice than Madison, and I think that's kind of all you need. I think that Madison, for example, Madison right now is averaging like 3.5 yards a carry. Really, he's only had a couple of games with 4 or more carries, and only in one of those games did he ever, in the past like 5 or 6, did he average more than 4.5 yards a carry. So I don't see what switching to Madison will do. Now, he has had 1 or 2 runs that have been kind of impressive, but that's just such a low sample. I wouldn't kind of trust that level of data to say that Madison's playing better. The issue with Cook is not the issue with Cook, right? I think it's primarily an issue with figuring out a way to craft a good running environment around him. Now, Sam on the football party did mention that Dalvin Cook has his lowest yards above expected. It's the first time it's been negative, right? Which, that's a good point, right? Like the data that they use for like next gen stats takes into account like blocking position and angles, and tells you kind of on a typical play, given where the defenders are, the offensive players are, the blocking that we're getting, the angles that we're getting, how much does a running back typically get? And Dalvin Cook has been negative. And I'll admit that, there are times this year where it felt like he's had vision issues, but I think primarily the problem is with the run blocking, and primarily the problem is with the way the scheme is designed. I wish I could be more specific on that second point. It's mostly me kind of cribbing off of some of these film guys, talking about, stuff like, how often Dalvin has the ability based on the blocking assignments to get to the outside and push forward, versus, anything else. And to me, it feels like there's a tell about where the Vikings are running or what they're doing with the run game. Watching just Dalvin Cook play, I think that he is playing okay. I don't think that he's playing at the best that I've seen him, but I don't think that he's playing at a level where I'd be alarmed at his level of play or anything like that. So that doesn't strike me as a solution. I think the issue primarily is just that the Vikings are not crafting a good running environment around him, and I don't think Madison is meaningfully capable of producing much more than Dalvin is.
Let's go to Connor, or rather Basecamp K9, who asks, for the make Arif get in-depth calculations, or magic for short, corner, it looked like the Lions schemed to keep the Vikings in base defense. Is the DVOA of our sub-packages that much better? Linebackers seem to have more depth than the cornerbacks and safeties.
The issue is not that and I don't have like the DVOA of the specific sub-packages in front of me. And I'm not I don't think that that's actually available on Football Outsiders. But I it's tough to tell because the Vikings ran so many different personnel packages in this game. Like, for example, Chandon Sullivan was on the field in 52 defensive snaps. There were 70 defensive snaps, right? Chandon Sullivan's the nickel corner, right? So in theory, that would mean that they were actually in their quote unquote actual, their actual defense, the nickel package with 4 defensive linemen. But we did see Harrison Phillips and Khyiris Tonga like combined for 50 plus as well. So the Vikings were very clearly running a variety of packages. We saw Jordan Hicks out and Brian Asamoah in on occasion. I don't think that the Lions were scheming to keep the Vikings in a particular defense because the Vikings weren't responding to what the Lions were doing by running predictable personnel and formations or anything like that. I think primarily the issue is that the Vikings defense is not particularly good for whatever reason, right? I mean, there's a lot of reasons that that's the case, but I don't think that the issue is like, I remember a while back, I was really concerned about, Chad Greenway being the third linebacker because you could put him on the field by just throwing another tight end out there or a fullback on the field, and then you basically, exploit him in coverage and stuff like that. And that ended up happening. That taught me a lesson that like, this is something like offenses are aware of and actively do. Like Chad Greenway was on the field for like 65 defensive snaps that game and got absolutely roasted. And so it seems like that's like a thing that you can do, but I don't think that that's what happened in this game. I think that, there's some issues with linebackers picking up crossers. There's some issues with, Eric Kendricks being as quick to trigger on the stuff that he sees. There's obviously issues with like Cameron Dance or whoever's playing cornerback that week over there. I don't think the issue was the matchups. And that also is it's not whether or not your linebackers are better or your safeties and cornerbacks are better. I mean, it's a little bit, but rather it's about kind of the matchup. Like, let's say Alec Ingold might be actually Kyle Juszczyk is the best example of like a fullback that if you put him on the field, you're probably going to match him by running, your front 7, right? Instead of having a front 6 or front 7. So whether that's 5 defensive linemen and 2 linebackers or 4 defensive linemen and 3 linebackers, that fullback is going to put, that 7th person on the field from the front 7 as opposed to from the secondary, right? But the problem is Kyle Juszczyk is like a bad matchup for almost any linebacker in the NFL, right? And some of the linebackers that can cover him like play for the 49ers, right? Like another team is not getting Fred Warner out there and Bobby Wagner's not running like he used to, right? So that's just Kyle Juszczyk is good and they're pursuing that matchup, or they know that they can get a receiver against a linebacker by putting that linebacker on the field, motioning the receiver because they know what your base call is going to be. And now you've got a receiver lined up against a linebacker. That has nothing to do with your linebacker versus your cornerback depth. That has everything to do with just kind of the way defenses are set up and what the calls are. So it matters a little bit because if a team trusts their wide receiver cornerback matchup more, or their like tight end linebacker matchup more, that's dependent on kind of whether or not your third linebacker or your 5th defensive back is kind of a better player. But a lot of times it's just like, we know that we can hunt matchups, and those matchups are a product of our players being able to beat this specific type of player. So I don't think that the Lions necessarily did that, but also I don't think that like the depth of each particular position is as important, especially because when the Vikings go in quote unquote base, it's not adding a linebacker on the field, it's adding a defensive lineman.
Next question is from the massive Kevin O'Connell fan who asks, do you think Justin Jefferson should be in the MVP race? I know he's nowhere close because it's a quarterback award, but if we're being realistic, where would you rank him amongst all of the other players based on value? And this is a good time to point out that you had written a piece on basically on this topic between him and the receiver for the
Dolphins, Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, Tyreek Hill.
Yeah. I think that he, quote unquote, should be. I mean, my stance on the MVP award is that we should just remove value from our voting, right? From the calculation of how we determine who the MVP is. This is like not unusual. Like most like honorifics have very little to do with like the name or the description, right? Like on occasion, and which has been covered on the show, the Heisman Award will sometimes invoke the character clause in the description of the Heisman Award.
Sometimes.
Um, not to get rid of people who have won who have like a criminal background. Like, I believe OJ Simpson still has his Heisman, right?
It's worth Googling. I'll look that up and see if they've, because they took away all of Cosby's trophies. So why the hell wouldn't they like take away OJ's Heisman? Like,
well, the Heisman's not an NCAA organization. The Heisman's just the Heisman.
Well, yes, but organizations have been known to take away their toys after a bit. So. But OJ took this one back, so I don't know. Maybe they're just I'm going to keep my mouth shut on this.
Wait, what do you think OJ is going to do? Why would they be afraid of him taking it back?
I don't know. Maybe you know what? I'm smart enough not to answer this. Go ahead and answer the Justin Jefferson portion of this question.
I just looked it up. OJ Simpson still has his Heisman.
Remarkable. Reggie Bush does not, but OJ still does.
Yeah. So, just fun facts, right? Fun facts everywhere. But yeah, I think that it makes the award not meaningless, but it removes a lot of, ironically, value from the award, because all you're doing if you follow the letter of the law, you can only give it to a quarterback. And honestly, it makes the most sense to give it to a quarterback on a rookie contract. So you just got to give it to the best quarterback in the first 4 years of his deal. And that's a stupid award. Like, I can't, like, obviously, right? Like, we should already have an award for the best quarterback. And in many ways, we do, right? It's the all-pro designation as the quarterback. If you're the first team all-pro quarterback, you're the best quarterback in the NFL. You are clearly the most valuable player, at least from like a team wins perspective. And if you happen to be on a rookie contract, you're clearly the most valuable player in terms of like a roster design perspective, right? And that's dumb. Let's not pay attention to the word value. Let's just give it to the best player. And that makes for so much more interesting conversations, right? So you could have a conversation about, hey, is Justin Jefferson better at receiver than, Chris Jones is a defensive tackle who might be having a better year than Aaron Donald, or Quinnen Williams? It's kind of in that same conversation. Are they better than, Myles Garrett, Joey Bosa, or TJ Watt? I guess not TJ Watt this year because he hasn't played enough, but having a conversation like that, is it better to be kind of like Trent Williams is having just a monstrous year again? Is it better to be, is Trent Williams better at tackle than Justin Jefferson is at receiver? We're not going to know the answer to that question. We could figure out some ways to like be a little bit more objective about it, but the conversations that drives, I think, are much more interesting than deciding between three quarterbacks. Like that's so stupid. And sometimes obviously a quarterback should win it. Like Patrick Mahomes winning it when he won it. Duh. I mean, that makes sense, right? But like, it really robs us of an opportunity to talk about some players that like I think really deserve to be talked about. Like Rob Gronkowski absolutely deserved that award at least one of the years that he was playing. That sounds so cool. And so when you open up that conversation, Justin Jefferson gets to be in that conversation. And when you open it up like that, especially if you add in like defensive players, like we should talk about Sauce Gardner, right? When you do that, it makes it less likely that he'll win, but he already has 0% chance of winning right now, especially without touchdowns, right? Which is not to say he's touchdown deficient, but like if you're a non-quarterback attempting to win the award, you have to be crazy good, like an outlier, right? If he had Devontae Adams' touchdown total, yeah, I think that he'd be in the conversation for an MVP award, especially that it's a down-ish quarterback year. But yeah, I mean, he should be in the conversation. I don't know that I would give it to him. I just submitted my wide receiver power rankings. I ranked him number 1 above Tyreek Hill. That was actually pretty difficult to figure out between the two of them. But, I figured that Jefferson can kind of do more things. It was like a sliver of a difference. Yeah, I mean, he should be in the conversation. If you're like not just the best at your position, but like a standout within that, like, because like the best center in the NFL is probably Creed Humphrey is not playing dramatically better than the rest of the centers compared to say Justin Jefferson and the rest of the receivers. So yeah, I think that he should be in the conversation, but that should be a conversation about reformatting the MVP award.
It does stick out when you look at the history of the MVP and you see Adrian Peterson and nobody else that's like not a quarterback for a really long time.
Yeah. And what really sucks is that like one of the best chances we had of a receiver winning it was Calvin Johnson in Adrian Peterson's year.
Yeah.
Like, oh, come on, man.
That was the year that he was able to go past the 1. Beef Brewski asks, with news that Irv Smith Jr. is potentially close to returning, do you see a meaningful role for him in the offense now that Hawkinson is here?
I think that they will probably use him a little bit like they were using him at the beginning of the season, which is not to feature him as a tight end. Obviously, I mean, he didn't even start week 1, I think. But rather to, do what we were just talking about, hunting matchups, right? If you can put 2 tight ends on the field, you can force a particular formation. Irv Smith's going to be a bad matchup for some of those guys. TJ Hawkinson's going to be a bad matchup for some of those guys. Or maybe those guys are bad at defending the run. You can run at them. Like the 2 tight end set has been really popular as a concept in the NFL. It hasn't been used as much. And I think Vikings fans are kind of sick of 2 tight end sets because of how often, Zimmer would force the offensive coordinators or would hire offensive coordinators who would like to use them. But the reason it's appealing is that if you're up against a team, and more likely than not, the 3 linebackers that team has, not good at both defending the run and defending the pass, you can basically audible at the line of scrimmage to leverage against, kind of whatever they're defending. If they decide to go big nickel and have a safety in there, you can just say, well, that guy's going to get blown up in the run game, so we're going to audible to a run and run right at him. If they decide to go with a third linebacker who's a run defender, you go, hey, I know that guy can't cover Irv Smith, so we're just going to audible to a pass. Like that's the appeal, right? And that's what the Patriots did with Rob Gronkowski and the other guy. And it's been kind of a trend to talk about it since then, but it hasn't really been actualized. I don't think that the Vikings will go full bore, but I think that they want to experiment with it a little bit, especially I know that before he got hurt, Irv Smith was not blocking as well as he did last year. But I think it's still there that he's got that capability. And if he can be that good of a blocker, if he can be that interesting, I'm not saying great, but interesting as a receiver, certainly that's something they should explore.
Next question is going to be from Mason Beck, who asks, has Jeff Saturday's performance so far been better, worse, or about the same as you expected it to be? I wonder if already having an infrastructure in place when you get hired makes things significantly easier.
No, I don't think that it does. So I'll defer to the guest because we spent quite a bit of time talking about Jeff Saturday. And, Christopher was less than impressed with what Saturday did. Obviously, those first 2 games out of the gate were kind of interesting. It was a little bit of a surprise. But I don't think having that infrastructure in place is better because you don't know any of those people. You don't know what their process is. You don't have an understanding of the underlying reasons that they were brought in. You don't know their strengths and weaknesses. So knowing that, I guess the wide receivers coach, I guess their assistant wide receivers coach is Reggie Wayne. I don't think it's the wide receivers coach is Reggie Wayne. But either way, Reggie Wayne, maybe that's a little bit different. But you don't know, you're an offensive lineman, right? As the head coach, you don't know what your offensive line's head coach, you don't know what your offensive line coach kind of wants to do. And obviously, after having a conversation with him, you can have a really good idea. But it's not as good as having a months-long relationship before you head into the season, right? So I actually don't think that infrastructure in place is as powerful. Plus, you don't know what processes everyone else is used to. And it's easier organizationally for you to adjust to their processes than for all several hundred people in the building to adjust to what your conception of the process should be. It's just easier to ease yourself in over the course of a full off season. So I don't think that that's the case. And I think that Saturday and Parks Frazier getting kind of overwhelmed has been part of the story as the season has progressed. And now that, his really awesome speeches have kind of withered away, right? It's laid bare that the Colts are just not very talented on offense and don't have a super coherent coaching structure to kind of accommodate that. So I was very impressed for those first 2 games. And then kind of after that,
Yeah, things kind of went back to normal. From Cody, for our Reefs Days of the Week corner, do you think the NFL is giving the Indianapolis Colts a competitive advantage by allowing Jeff Saturday to coach an NFL game on a Saturday?
Yeah. Yep.
Obviously. Jeez. Yeah. Don't really need to spell that out any further. Anya Taylor-Joy asks, have the Raiders also been cheating to make Carlson better at point-after attempts and field goals? If so, can we do the same thing with Greg Joseph? Now, this is a funny story because this was something accidentally exposed by the Pat McAfee show.
Yeah, this is pretty incredible. So I guess didn't like realize that this was like a thing. Like I saw this question, I had no idea what was going on. So James let me know. Apparently the Raiders had been setting up the ball on top of the tee, and in order for that to make sense, you need to like imagine a football tee. It's kind of like a photo easel. I don't know. That seems kind of old school too. Maybe that's not helpful at all. You set the ball in the crook of the tee, basically, right? So it's about an inch off the ground. Or you could set it atop the point at the top of the tee and get it another inch and a half off the ground, right? And that apparently makes, and actually this is very easy to believe, I don't even know why I said apparently, that makes an enormous difference in your ability to use your power to kick the ball up and kick it short of the end zone in order to get your coverage team just, a couple more seconds, more like half a second, honestly, downfield so that they can get the tackle at like the 10 or anything like that, right? So the Raiders, it seems like there wasn't like a rule against it, but the NFL just kind of decided, you know what, now there is.
Yeah, NFL rolled their newspaper, or the newspaper together and hit them on the nose and went, stop it now. And all as a result of the Pat McAfee thing. they highlighted it. Yeah, right. They highlighted it and went, wait a second, this shouldn't be, is this legal? Because they noticed the same, oddly enough, like I had noticed this too. It's like, they're indoors. They're kicking indoors. Why do they have someone holding the ball there? Because they're allowed to have, yeah, they're allowed to have someone hold the ball for the kickoff if it's super windy. If the ball keeps flying off the tee, great, we have somebody to hold it. Put a finger down. But like this was the Rams stadium. There's even if it was the Viking stadium, even if the doors are open and Brady Quinn is announcing, the wind isn't going to cause that thing to fall off. So yeah, it was weird.
It was like, which I hadn't like really thought about it or realized, but like the whole point of the holder, like you said, is the wind, and so they've just been having someone hold the ball. I don't know, very funny. I was telling James before the show, this actually kind of reminds me of like NASCAR and to some extent F1, which I know a ton of people are like super into F1 right now, and I am not, which is not like I just don't know that much about it. So I can't go into detail about this, but the history of racing is like a history of people cheating and bending the rules in ways that are absolutely delightful. Like just like shenanigans level stuff. And it's just, and like the rules in NASCAR, because it's called stock car, again, correct me if I'm wrong, because there's limitations on what you can do with the car, right? Like it's just everybody has a very similar car, and so it's a contest of skill instead of who can engineer the best car. Again, my understanding. So the rules got so specific because people would keep on bending the rules. Like, so for example, there's a rule on how large the fuel tank can be, and they would test it by filling up the fuel tank. Like it comes in empty, they fill up the fuel tank, and when it is like full, when you get feedback from the engine or from the fuel tank, how much you've poured out, right? And that's the limitation. Well, they would start like inflating basketballs inside the fuel tank at that fill up, or at least at the test, so that now you know how full it is. And then they would deflate the basketball in there, and now the fuel tank is larger and has more capacity. They would just like do clown stuff like that, or like really old Pop Warner football, right? Like. And by Pop Warner, I mean literally the coach named Pop Warner, who is the coach at Carlisle Indian School. And he cheated all the time, in part because, the whole system was designed to cheat against like the indigenous people he was coaching at the Carlisle Indian School. Just a quick anecdote on that before I get back to this. The Carlisle Indian School beat, I want to say Princeton, right? Because football was essentially an Ivy League thing. Beat Princeton in an exhibition game, like in front of like 13,000 people. Obviously, an enormous, a group of people for a game way back then, like late 1800s, right, 19th century stuff. And but it was ruled a loss because they were like something along the lines of a guy essentially a guy was ruled down at the 1. Right, and so he didn't score a touchdown. That's not exactly what happened, but analogous to modern football, that's what would have happened. And that very clearly was not the case. Everybody in the crowd believed that, the Carlisle Indian School should have won. Princeton players were like, you absolutely should have won. But racism. And so the Carlisle Indian School was deemed to have lost. And even the people writing the newspapers who just the day prior were writing in columns that there's no chance that like these underfed, tiny Indian boys are going to beat, the big burly war fighters at Princeton, which is kind of a weird way to think about Princeton nowadays. But that was the idea, right? So constantly the system is set up against him, right? One of the reasons that we have modern passing is because Carlisle Indian School realized that if they practiced passing and no one else was doing it, they would win games if they just caught like 2 or 3 passes a game, which, by the way, is true. So they would like screw with the rules all the time. One of my favorites is that Pop Warner would sew a pocket onto the jerseys, and you could just like put the football in the pocket of the jersey.
Just amazing to think about.
Just like, why were you thinking? Like, how was your brain doing that? And whatever football association, like the Ivy League or whatever, was like, okay, you can't.
No.
You can't. That's ridiculous. No, you can't do that. Or, they would like find a particularly small player, given the, like at the goal line, right? Or basically everything in football back then was basically a goal line play, right? But at the goal line, in order to get the touchdown, they're just like throw him over the pile. And they're like, okay, that you can't like physically pick up a player holding a ball and throw him over. That's insano. You can't do that. So that's what this reminds me of. It's just like this weird rule bending. Like, what are you doing? We have to just like, we're not changing the rules. We're issuing a memorandum of understanding on what these rules mean. Stop.
Sounds like me with the Hell League changing rules in mid-season, but
yeah, I mean, you would never do that.
No, never once. Let's go to Nick Howard, who asks, who are we rooting for in the linear Super Bowl Sunday night?
So I was trying to like figure out who the Vikings would play in the playoffs. I was like, wait, if Washington wins, then the Vikings play the Giants. And if the Giants win, the Vikings play Washington. Obviously, there's 3 games left to go. That'll change. But, the way the playoff machine worked if the playoffs were held that day, right? And I was like, that kind of sucks. Oh, no. And James was like, Arif, just look at the schedule, Arif. And I was like, okay. The Vikings play the Giants in week 16.
Yeah, as it turns out, next week, it's the Giants. So, yeah. Norse Code is highly pushing for the Giants to win this so that the Vikings can win back the linear Super Bowl trophy.
Yeah, that's a critical part of what we're doing here. Yes. We root for the linear Super Bowl and its return.
And its rightful return to its rightful owners, the Minnesota Vikings. R. Menson asks, for Norse Code Trust Issues Corner, we all know that the Vikings are not to be trusted at this point, but does that extend to all things Norse Code related? I currently sit 1 spot out of the playoffs in the Hell League and need a win and also a victory from none other than James Pagashnik to get into the playoffs. Can I trust James to go out and secure a victory for me? No. I forgot to set my stuff because I was too busy with the foot and a half of snow we got in the last 2 days. So, no, you are probably screwed. Sorry.
Yeah, you're done.
Yeah, I was busy trying to make sure that my mailman was going to be like delivering Christmas packages to me and not being angry while doing so. It's like when Arif did this and then fell asleep during Case Cookus, except I didn't fall asleep afterwards. So let's go to Ingram's left foot, Case Cookus, who says, I'm getting legally married this Saturday. No Spanish required, hopefully. For James's wedding corner, I know seeing the bride is before is bad luck, but is watching your football team before bad luck? Boy.
Geez. That feels pretty contextual to your football team, right?
I mean, it depends. Are you getting married at like halftime and then like listening to it on XM on the way back to whatever you're doing? When you say legally married, either A, you're pointing a finger at me, or B, you're just saying that, oh, we're getting the paperwork signed and then we're having the ceremony in a couple of months. Which if it sounds like what you were doing because you were trying to do something in January. So
right.
Yeah, listen. Watching football before your wedding?
So my take is, if there is an opportunity for you to be in a sour mood before your wedding and you can avoid it, avoid it. I just find out later, man. Like
Nonsense. Nonsense. This is. Let's set the tone right now. Let's set the tone right now. Hell is other people, and so is watching the Minnesota Vikings. So right now, it's a logical combination. You got chocolate in my peanut butter. No, you got peanut butter in my chocolate. Two great tastes that go together. Let's go to E.T. Spaceman, who asks, when is Norse Code releasing NFT trading cards?
Oh my god. Oh god. So I don't know if you've seen the discourse. But Donald Trump on Truth Social, the free speech social media, they're all free speech ones now, I guess, right? They just ban you for arbitrary stuff instead of clearly defined stuff, which is more free speechy. Let's not pretend Twitter was like very clearly defined before Elon Musk bought it, but you know. But on Truth Social, Trump 2 days ago, he was like, very big announcement for everybody. You're all gonna love this announcement. And I was like, oh my god, he's running. Oh my god, he's gonna run for president again. And everyone's like, this is crazy. Like Trump Kanye 2024. This is gonna be wild. And you know, from a content perspective, that's like very exciting. From like a how is humanity doing perspective, pretty worrisome. Everyone knows my stance here. But no, he was just announcing he was selling NFT trading cards. And we've dunked on NFTs a lot on this podcast. I don't know if it's mostly been held behind Patreon stuff. Just I know when I speak into this mic, I'm dunking on NFTs. And one of the dunks, of course, is that they are like ugly. Like structurally, they kind of almost have to be ugly because of the reproducibility aspect and all of that, right? So they're just like ugly, right? Not all of them are all the time. There's some pretty good art, but that's not the point. Most of them are ugly most of the time, and some of them like dramatically and disturbingly, like viscerally ugly. Like you have like an emotional reaction to seeing this like this monkey that has its like skin peeled off, and that's like it's a cartoon, and you're like, man, I've seen enough Ren and Stimpy, man. I don't like need all of this in my life all the time. It's not my profile pic. But the Trump trading card NFTs are like a different. It's incompetently ugly. They all look. I mean, they all are badly photoshopped, and not in a way that's like campy, kind of funny, like Sam Bradford on Teddy Bridgewater's body. Like
that's amazing. That's art. That belongs in the Louvre.
Incredible, especially because it was kind of talented, right? It was seamless, which is what made it look so ridiculous, right? Because they clearly don't. That doesn't work, right? but this is just bad. Like the glasses on the Air Force photo, or like the aviators were like just off, and like he was in a race car suit. And clearly, they only photoshopped his face onto the race car suit. It was just like bad. And James was telling me for the show, apparently they just stole him from Google Images of photoshops of Trump.
Yeah, it was amazing. But to answer your question,
yes,
about this. It turns out a couple of months ago, probably like 9 months ago.
What is turns out? Oh no.
About 9 months ago, someone approached me, and I cannot find the DM because I remember deleting it laughing. Somebody had approached me about potentially doing an NFT collaboration involving Norse Code. And I remember snorting. I remember laughing maniacally, closing my laptop, walking over and pouring a drink. These were the steps I took. It was one of those like late at night, wasn't a recording night. I had my laptop open. I saw that. I laughed. I put it away. I deleted it, put it away, and totally forgot about it until like 2 weeks ago when I went, by the way, did you know that I got approached for an NFT thing? And you're like, oh my God, you're kidding me. We could have been on the forefront of
right before the collapse. Wow.
Yeah.
We could have been
absolute chicanery.
Yeah.
Just ridiculousness. I needed rum. I believe that was a rum night. Is what happened there. Micah asks, for Arif, does all the discourse about this team's supposed fraudulence falsely presuppose that sports teams have an essential identity? It seems mistaken to assume that a particular performance reveals what this team really is, either as legitimate or fraudulent. Would it be more constructive to think of teams, and particularly this team, as being neither essentially good nor bad, but is capable of performing in a variety of, often contradictory ways. Trying to pin down an essential, a fixed essence just feels like a colossal waste of energy.
Okay, so first of all, come on, man. So, like, there is no essential essence or character of a team that relates to its fraudulence or legitimacy except in reference to outside expectations. And what I mean is, the Vikings are only a fraudulent team in the context of us comparing them to other 10-win teams at this point in the season, right? The argument that the Vikings are fraudulent is a nice, hot takey way of saying that they're not playing up to the level that we typically expect of 10-win teams. Which, if you look at it from a bunch of different statistical perspectives like DVOA and EPA, and yeah, sure, fine, right? They're the worst 10-win team in DVOA history, which, I think Vikings fans would take. But so that's what it means. It doesn't mean what would they be accused of committing fraud for were it not for our understanding of what our expectations of our 10-win team to be. So it can only be to an outside referent, and that makes it a non-essential quality because it cannot be the essence of the Vikings if it can only be a reference to something outside. You cannot be a fraud to an interior self, right? You can only be your authentic self to yourself. So my argument that the Vikings are fraudulent is not about whether or not the Vikings are, say, a fundamentally qualitatively good team. They kind of are, right? Like it's a kind of a good team. But it's more kind of what the like for example, the Vikings are top 5 in a lot of power rankings, right? I don't think they're one of the best 5 teams in the NFL. So that's what fraudulent means. So if we changed our expectations of the Vikings, right? If our expectations of the Vikings were that they'd be an exciting team, oh, absolutely not fraudulent, right? Are they an enjoyable team? I think this year, yeah, absolutely, right? Are they like a legitimate team? Certainly, they're a legal entity within the franchise of NFL football and have ownership over the broadcast rights of the Upper Midwest region for Minnesota Vikings football, right? So they are a legitimate team, but the performance of the team is not up to the standards that you'd expect for a 10-win team. I don't think many Vikings fans are truly blind to this. And the reason that people are upset with me is less that they disagree that the Vikings aren't as good as a 10-win team, but more they don't want to be reminded of it after a win, which I sympathize with, but I'm sorry, that's kind of my job. So there's that. I think also teams don't have static identities, right? For example, in my praise of the Detroit Lions, right? They were a substantially different team after, week 7, right? They'd fired their defensive backs coach in week 6. They changed what they did on offense to be kind of more in line with what Jared Goff is used to doing. Schematically, on defense and on offense, and technically, especially on defense, they were a substantially different team in the way that they conducted themselves. And so the Detroit Lions, the essence of the team changed, right? And so it's not a static identity of the team. If my argument about why the best opportunity for the Vikings to sustain their success going into the playoffs is for Kirk Cousins to basically play like he did last week, right? That was a phenomenal game, right? And we've seen Kirk Cousins play like this before. We've seen Kirk Cousins play at a really high level. And all that needs to happen, big ask, so maybe not all that needs to happen, but the thing that needs to happen is that they play to a previous standard of play on offense while retaining the really the different elements that are good about this year's offense, right? Their ability to play in the fourth quarter, their ability to score on the first drive, their unlikelihood of giving up the ghost in the final 2 minutes, which more of a defensive problem last year than an offensive problem. But, it's probably meaningful that all these teams had possession at some point in the final 2 minutes, right? Like the offense needs to stay on the field. Maintaining clutch play, maintaining Kirk Cousins' improvisational capability, maintaining his ability to be a bit more of an athlete, while also allowing him to be a really good first and second down passer in the second quarter or something like that. Something he was really good at last year. would make this team sustainably good, right? The issue with the Vikings is that on offense, where they're statistically good, is that they're inconsistent, right? There's a bunch of 3-and-outs and there's a bunch of drives that get to the red zone. And on defense, the defense is typically not as bad as it was last week, but defense, they're not great, but they do typically hold up in the red zone. They just didn't, right? So it's not the static essence of the Vikings is not fraudulent, nor is that possible because of the philosophical construction of this question. It's not pinning down a fixed essence more as it is a recalibration of our understanding of what that essence means to an outside referent. I hated this question.
Let's go to Tim Rizzo, who asks, for Arif's Little Gobbler's Corner, he has a couple of suggestions for something we covered last episode, where there was a question about what would you call the Arif stands out there that are kind of like the Swifties of the Norse code world of the Twitterverse as it were. And he has a couple of suggestions here, including Hassan's Homies, the Hastans, Arif's Bewitched Beauties, the Braun Bunny Bullies, also known as the 3Bs. I like that one. The Seattle Hassans, and the Arifs to feed the monster that is his ego.
Okay, we can't go with Arifs. That's dumb and feels weird to call everybody. I don't like the phrase "my fans." That feels insanely conceited. But
but at the same time,
we are essentially defining. We're working so that we don't have to use the incredibly lame phrase "Arif Nation." So I get it. I get what we're doing. Norse Code Nation sounds better. I'll be completely honest. You get the ends right, but the Seattle Hassans, obviously that's out. Braun Bullies, that's clearly out. The Luke Braun thing, that's a bit. We can't make the whole thing the bit, right?
Yeah.
Arif's Bewitched Beauties, we're done with witches and magic, so that can't be it. Hassan's Homies is weird because there's like a very famous online personality named Hassan, and so like you just can't do that now. It doesn't work. It has to be like Arif, right? So I'm sorry, Tim. This is all creative, and some of it is actually none of it's good, but it was creative. And I really appreciated it, but I don't like any of them.
The Hastans are pretty cool.
Honestly, the Little Gobblers, as much as I hate it, is like kind of better. The thing with the Hastans is, again, because of Hassan Piker, like it's tough to build it around my last name instead of my first name, which on the internet is slightly more unique, at least in the spaces that I'm in. Did someone say in the Discord Arif's Wreaths?
Yes.
Or was that you?
I don't remember. I'm like you at times with the podcast. When I say something, I don't remember it, which is also to say I need to apologize for saying last episode that the Chargers that the Chargers won the Adrian Peterson record game. I was wrong. I was thinking of something different. I was thinking how the Chargers have the record for the longest play, but still lost that game. That's what I was thinking of. I had confused the two at that particular moment. Apologies. Many people have pointed out that I was wrong. Sorry. I was absolutely wrong. The Vikings won the Adrian Peterson record game against the Chargers in 2007.
Yeah.
So, yeah, my bad.
Oops. I think a lot of people were expecting pushback from me, and it was like one of those situations where I was like, man, I really thought the Vikings won because Childress like pulled Peterson right before he could get the record. And the only way you do that is if you're winning. But it's also like one of those things where it's like, I'm not going to confidently correct you, and I don't care enough to Google it.
That's the story of this podcast. Longtime listeners know since episode 3.
Yeah, so I was like, whatever. There were a number of people that this was like really important to people that Peterson got the record in a win as opposed to a loss, which I understand why. I was just like surprised.
Yeah, my bad. Apologies. Don from Ohio finishes us off this week with for James and Arifs, you guys suck at Christmas gifts corner. A couple of weeks ago, I asked you guys to help me out with selecting a Christmas gift for my wife since she selfishly bought herself several of them prior to Christmas itself. James said, draw my inspiration from holiday commercials. And Arif said, buy a Lexus with a bow on it. The Lexus was a bit out of my price range, but I did stay with the holiday commercial theme and bought her a Peloton. Remember how happy the wife was when she saw the Peloton for the first time? Lo and behold, the Peloton showed up 2 days earlier than anticipated, and the wife was home when they delivered it. My work phone was blowing up with messages from my wife saying, call me ASAP. When I finally got a hold of her, she was screaming at me, is that thing for me? I told her yes, and she went off on a multi-syllable curse words I had never heard before. Mm-hmm. She asked me where I got the idea, and I told her it was from you two. Why in God's name would you ask them to pick out my present? Why indeed, honey? Why indeed? You guys have 1 week to fix this mess that you created. It's bad enough you had me lie to her, and now you guys ruined Christmas. So, what present are you guys buying her to fix this whole situation? P.S. Do you know anyone who is interested in a brand new, slightly dented exercise equipment? DM me if you do.
It's almost like environmental storytelling, that PS. Okay, so obviously Don lies all the time about the advice that we give on the show to him. But this one is amazing because in the story, like, he constructs the lie, right? Like, he lies to his wife that we said to buy a Peloton, which isn't even in the story that he comes up with about what we said.
Exactly.
It's incredible. Also, if you didn't listen to the last episode, the Lexus bit is that I hate the commercials where they buy Lexuses because it's just like not a feasible. I don't even know if it was on the show. It's just like one of the things that I like clearly hate and talk about every year. I hate the Christmas commercials. I'm just going to say here, I hate the Christmas commercials where they buy Lexuses because, and I got into like a weird argument about this 2 years ago, which it's Twitter. That's what I do. But my argument is like a Lexus is an insane gift because either it is a really big purchase, right? And you shouldn't make purchases that large and changing without consulting your significant other. Or if you make enough money to casually buy a Lexus, you should actually more seriously consider buying a better car. And a bunch of people got like really mad that like Lexuses aren't bad cars. And I was like, I never said they were bad. In fact, within that class of cars that they are, they're probably quite good as luxury cars. My point is there are like better cars, like you could just buy a better car that costs more, and that's a more serious investment. You should never just casually buy a Lexus as a gift because either you will probably already own a better car because you can afford to casually buy a Lexus, or you should make your decisions in concert with your wife. So I hate the Lexus commercials a lot. I've ranted about this on Twitter before, and now I've ranted about it at least twice on this podcast. So no, I'm very clearly against buying the Lexus with a bow on it. Although, man, this is a really funny telling of the story for the Peloton wife. That was such a great, because it's like when you remember a couple of episodes ago we talked about like the chili discourse and the chili neighbor getting canceled. It's like that, but for like fake people. The guy on Twitter who bought the Peloton for his wife, and the wife who like either was a bad actress or was like very clearly like uncomfortable and didn't like being told to lose weight for Christmas. The guy's fake. He's a commercial figment. No one cares. So canceling him was all kinds of fun. But this is wild. So no, we're not buying your wife anything. Just get better at buying gifts. We never even said on the podcast you said where you got the idea. Not even the kernel of the idea came from the podcast in your own telling of the story.
Yeah. Listen, just tell her the truth. The Peloton is a direct result of her losing your jacket in Hawaii.
Yeah, that's precisely.
Yeah, that's all you need to say there. All right, that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. No, we're not buying you anything from Christmas, Don. Arif, what do you have to plug?
Yeah, so over at Pro Football Network, I just released a mock draft. It was tough because, like, I pretty strongly agree that the Vikings should get a cornerback, but given how the board fell, I don't think I could do that. So head over to profootballnetwork.com. /author/ASON to find the mock draft there. It was a lot of fun to do. It was my first mock draft of the season. I learned a lot about the teams that I was drafting for and a lot about those prospects. Also wrote wide receiver power ranking. Like I said, Justin Jefferson's at the top. I think on the football party today, I said I put Adam Thielen in the top 20. Looks like I lied. Figure out how I lied when that gets released in a couple of days. Also, obviously, recaps of previous games. And yeah, I mean, I talked about the Eagles. I talked about the Cowboys. I talked about the Vikings, the Chiefs. You can find that all there over at profootballnetwork.com.
So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that this is not sustainable. And we will be back next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of Pro Football Network, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
Hey, all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.